Hey, son, it is 1974, and your mother is standing at the kitchen counter with a can of cream of mushroom soup in one hand and a package of ground beef in the other. The radio's playing something soft. The neighbor's sprinkler is going. The air smells like cut grass and whatever is browning in the skillet. This is dinner. This is Tuesday. Tonight we are talking about something stranger than your uncle's toupee. What Americans actually ate in the 1970s when nobody was at McDonald's. Because here is the thing. Fast food was everywhere, sure, but most meals still happened at home. And what happened at home was weirder, more specific, and more honest than anyone remembers. The casseroles were real. The Jell-O salads were structural. The fondue pot was not ironic. If you lived through it, you know. If you did not, buckle up. Before we go any further, if you are enjoying this, hit that like button. Subscribe if you have not already. Drop a comment and let me know what your family ate on a regular Tuesday in 1973. Also, we are now live on Spotify. You can find the link in the description. Throw us on during your commute, your workout, or when you are trying to fall asleep and need something that sounds like your grandfather explaining the world. We appreciate it. So what did a Tuesday night feel like when your mom pulled a recipe from a magazine and just went for it? What did the pantry look like when everything came in cans and boxes and nobody apologized for it? What did people actually put on the table when company came over? Did your dad really eat liver? Did your neighbor actually serve ambrosia salad at a potluck and mean it? What did the freezer smell like? What did breakfast look like on a Saturday morning when nobody was rushing anywhere? It is 1975 now. The coffee pot is percolating. Your mother is flipping through a spiral-bound cookbook she got at a church fundraiser. The dog is asleep under the table. And everything is about to make sense. Let's start with the casserole, because if you did not grow up with one on the table at least twice a week, you did not grow up in the 1970s. The casserole was not some regrettable trend or a punchline waiting to happen. It was dinner. Real dinner. Your mother made it in a 9x13 pan, and it fed the whole family with enough left over for your father to take to work the next day, in a Tupperware container that would never quite come clean. The casserole was cream of mushroom soup, ground beef, egg noodles, frozen peas, and a can of fried onions on top if she was feeling fancy. It went into the oven at 350 for 40 minutes, and by the time your dad got home, the kitchen smelled like salt and comfort and a little bit of char around the edges. The casserole solved a problem that most families had every single weeknight. How to feed 4 or 5 or 6 people without spending a fortune or standing over the stove for 2 hours. Your mother worked, or she had been running errands all day, or she had 3 kids under the age of 10 and no energy left by 5 o'clock. The casserole could be assembled in 15 minutes. Brown the meat, boil the noodles, open the cans, mix it all together, and slide it into the oven. Then she could sit down. She could fold laundry. She could help you with homework. The casserole cooked itself. The base was almost always cream of something soup. Cream of mushroom, cream of chicken, cream of celery. Campbell's made them all, and they sat in the pantry in rows, waiting. The soup was thick and salty and turned everything it touched into something cohesive. It was glue. It was gravy. It was the thing that held the casserole together and made it taste like a meal instead of a pile of ingredients. You did not question it. You did not even taste it specifically. It was just there. The way air is there. The casserole also meant leftovers, which meant your mother did not have to cook again the next night. She could reheat a square of it in the oven, and it tasted even better the second day, because the flavors had settled into each other. The noodles had absorbed more of the soup. The fried onions on top had softened, Your father took a portion to work in a container, and he ate it cold at his desk or warmed it up in the break room if there was a microwave. The casserole stretched. That was the point. There were variations, but the structure stayed the same. Tuna casserole with potato chips crushed on top. Chicken and rice casserole with a can of cream of chicken soup and a cup of uncooked rice that expanded in the oven and soaked up all the liquid. Hamburger casserole with elbow macaroni and tomato sauce and a layer of cheese that melted into a golden crust. Every family had their version. Every mother had her recipe, copied onto an index card or memorized from making it 100 times. The casserole was practical, but it was also warm. It came out of the oven bubbling at the edges, and your mother set it on the table still in the baking dish with a potholder underneath. She scooped it onto plates with a spatula, and the servings held their shape for a moment before collapsing into something soft and steaming. You ate it with a fork. You ate it with white bread on the side to soak up the extra sauce. And when you were done, the pan went into the sink to soak overnight, because nothing else would get the baked-on cheese off the edges. The casserole was not a joke. It was how your mother fed you. And it worked. Now we need to talk about Jell-O salad, because this was not dessert. This was a side dish. It sat on the table next to the pot roast and the dinner rolls, and nobody questioned it. Your aunt made it in a bundt mold. Green Jell-O with shredded carrots, crushed pineapple, and miniature marshmallows suspended in the center like some kind of edible science experiment. She unmolded it onto a plate lined with iceberg lettuce, and it jiggled when someone set the table too hard. You served yourself a slice. You ate it with a fork. It tasted like lime and sugar and something vaguely vegetable adjacent, and everyone acted like this was normal because it was. Jell-O salad had rules. It had to be made the night before, so it had time to set properly in the refrigerator. Your aunt would boil water, dissolve the Jell-O powder, add cold water, and then stir in whatever she was suspending that week. Sometimes it was fruit cocktail from a can. Sometimes it was mandarin oranges. Sometimes it was shredded cabbage, which sounds insane now, but made perfect sense then. She poured the mixture into a mold, covered it with plastic wrap, and left it in the fridge overnight. By the time she brought it to dinner the next day, it had solidified into something firm and wobbly and oddly beautiful. The unmolding was an event. Your aunt would fill the sink with hot water, dip the mold in for a few seconds to loosen the edges, then flip it onto a plate and pray. Sometimes it came out perfectly, a glossy dome with all the fruit visible through the translucent gelatin. Sometimes it collapsed into a pile of green mush, and she had to scoop it into a bowl and pretend that was the plan all along. Either way, it made it to the table. Jell-O salad occupied a strange place in the meal. It was called a salad, which suggested vegetables and health. And technically, it had vegetables in it, or at least fruit, which was close enough. But it was sweet. Very sweet. The Jell-O itself was sugar and artificial flavoring. The Cool Whip or sour cream on top added more sweetness. The marshmallows added even more. So you ate it alongside your pot roast and your mashed potatoes, and your palate had to make a sudden shift from savory to sweet and back again. Nobody minded. That was just how the meal worked. There were regional variations. In the Midwest, Jell-O salad often included shredded carrots and crushed pineapple. In the South, it might have pecans and cream cheese mixed in. On the coasts, people were starting to question why anyone was eating Jell-O with their dinner, but the tradition held strong in the middle of the country. Church potlucks always had at least 3 Jell-O salads on the table, each one a different color, each one made by a different woman who had her own secret technique. The Jell-O salad was also a status thing. A woman who could unmold a perfect Jell-O ring was a woman who knew what she was doing in the kitchen. It required timing, patience, and a steady hand. It required planning ahead. It required owning the right mold, which was usually a bundt pan or a ring mold that had been passed down from someone's mother. The Jell-O salad was a signal that the meal had been thought through, that someone had put in effort, that this was not just thrown together at the last minute. And here is the thing. People liked it. Kids liked it because it was sweet and jiggly and fun to eat. Adults liked it because it was light and refreshing and added color to the table. Your aunt liked it because it was easy to make and easy to transport and always got compliments. The Jell-O salad was a win all around. It is harder to find now. Jell-O salad fell out of fashion sometime in the 1980s when people started questioning why they were eating gelatin with their meat. But for a long time, it was everywhere. And if you ate it, you remember exactly what it tasted like. The TV dinner was not what you think. It was not sad. It was not a last resort. The TV dinner was exciting. It came in a compartmentalized aluminum tray with a picture of the meal on the box, and you could see exactly what you were getting before you peeled back the foil. Salisbury steak in one section, mashed potatoes in another, green beans in the third, and a little square of apple cobbler in the corner. You put it in the oven, not the microwave, because most homes did not have one yet, and waited 45 minutes while the house filled with the smell of reconstituted beef and processed gravy. Then you ate it in front of the television, balanced on a TV tray, while your parents watched the news, and you watched the Salisbury steak slowly congeal. The TV dinner represented something new. For the first time, you could have a complete meal that required no preparation beyond opening a box and turning on the oven. No chopping, no stirring, no checking to see if the meat was done. The meal was already cooked. All you had to do was heat it up. For a working mother or a tired father or a family that did not feel like dealing with dishes, the TV dinner was a miracle. Swanson made the most famous ones, but there were others. Banquet, Morton. Each brand had its own lineup of entrees. Salisbury steak was the standard, but you could also get fried chicken, turkey with stuffing, meatloaf, or fish sticks. The side dishes were always the same: mashed potatoes, corn, peas, or green beans. The dessert was always a fruit cobbler or a brownie. The portions were small, which meant kids ate one and adults ate two if they were hungry. The aluminum tray was part of the appeal. It was divided into sections so nothing touched. The gravy stayed with the meat. The cobbler stayed separate from the green beans. This was important to kids who had strong opinions about food touching. The tray also meant no dishes to wash. You ate straight from it, then threw it away. That was revolutionary. Dinner without cleanup was not something most families experienced in the 1970s. The TV dinner got its name because it was designed to be eaten in front of the television, but not every family did that. Some mothers still insisted on eating at the table, even if the meal came from a box. But on nights when a special show was on, or when everyone was too tired to sit at the table and make conversation, the TV dinners came out. You set up the TV trays in the living room, balanced the aluminum tray on top, and watched whatever was on. The meal became secondary to the show. You ate without thinking about it, which was sometimes exactly what you needed. The food itself was salty, overprocessed, and only vaguely resembled what it was supposed to be. The Salisbury steak was gray and dense and covered in a gravy that tasted like beef bouillon and cornstarch. The mashed potatoes were gluey and artificial. The green beans were limp and waterlogged. But none of that mattered, because the TV dinner was not about quality. It was about convenience. It was about not having to think. It was about getting food on the table, or on the TV tray, without effort. And for kids, the TV dinner was a treat. It felt special. It felt modern. It felt like something from the future, where meals came in boxes and nobody had to cook. You got to pick your own entree from the freezer section at the grocery store, and that felt like control. You got to eat in front of the TV, and that felt like freedom. The TV dinner was not sad. It was progress. By the end of the 1970s, the microwave was starting to show up in more homes, and the TV dinner adapted. The aluminum tray was replaced with a plastic one. The cooking time dropped from 45 minutes to 5. But the idea stayed the same. A complete meal with no effort required. Just heat and eat. It is Sunday evening, and your parents are having people over. The fondue pot is out. This is not a gag. This is dinner. The fondue pot sits in the center of the table, plugged into the wall, heating a pot of oil or cheese or chocolate, depending on what course you are on. Your mother has arranged cubes of bread on a plate. Your father is opening a bottle of wine. The neighbors arrive, and everyone sits around the table with long forks, spearing bread and dipping it into molten cheese. The conversation is warm. The cheese is hotter. Someone drops a piece of bread into the pot and has to fish it out with their fork while everyone laughs. This is sophistication. This is what people did when they wanted to impress someone. The fondue pot came into American homes in the late 1960s and exploded in popularity through the 70s. It was Swiss, which made it exotic. It was interactive, which made it fun. And it was easy, which made it practical. Your mother did not have to cook an elaborate meal and time everything perfectly. She just had to melt cheese or heat oil and let everyone cook their own food. The guests did half the work, and they enjoyed it. Cheese fondue was the most common. Your mother melted Swiss or Gruyere cheese with a little white wine and garlic, and everyone dipped cubes of French bread into it. The bread had to be speared carefully so it did not fall off the fork. You swirled it in the cheese to coat it completely, then lifted it to your mouth while trying not to drip. The cheese was rich and salty and slightly tangy from the wine. It stretched when you pulled the fork away, and you had to twirl it like spaghetti to keep it from dripping onto the tablecloth. Then there was fondue bourguignon, which was chunks of raw meat cooked in hot oil. Your mother filled the pot with vegetable oil and heated it until it was bubbling. Everyone got a plate of raw beef cubes and a long fork. You speared a piece of meat, held it in the oil until it cooked, then dipped it in one of the sauces your mother had set out. Béarnaise, horseradish, mustard. The meat cooked fast, and you had to be careful not to splash hot oil on yourself or anyone else. It was dinner and a game at the same time. Dessert fondue was chocolate. Your mother melted chocolate chips with a little cream, and everyone dipped strawberries, marshmallows, or chunks of pound cake into it. The chocolate was thick and glossy and tasted like pure sugar and cocoa. The strawberries were the best because the tartness cut through the sweetness. The marshmallows were too sweet, but kids loved them anyway. By the end of the night, the fondue pot was scraped clean and everyone was full and slightly sticky. The fondue pot was not just about the food. It was about the ritual. It was about sitting around a table for 2 hours, dipping and eating and talking. It slowed the meal down in a way that felt deliberate. Nobody rushed. Nobody checked their watch. You ate one bite at a time, and in between bites, you talked. The fondue pot forced you to be present. It also meant your mother did not have to disappear into the kitchen halfway through the meal to check on something in the oven. She sat at the table the whole time. She ate with everyone else. The fondue pot was democratic in that way. Nobody was serving. Everyone was participating. The fondue pot was a wedding gift, usually. A young couple got married, and someone gave them a fondue set in a box with the pot, the forks, and a little recipe booklet. The pot was ceramic or enameled metal, often in a bright color like orange or avocado green. It came with a stand and a little burner underneath to keep the cheese or oil hot. The forks were long and thin, with color-coded handles, so everyone knew which fork was theirs. By the 1980s, the fondue pot was falling out of fashion. It got shoved to the back of the cupboard, behind the crock pot and the electric skillet. But in the 70s, it was everywhere. And when your parents brought it out, you knew the evening was going to be something special. Your father ate liver, not because he was punishing himself, not because he lost a bet, because it was Tuesday and liver was cheap, and your mother knew how to cook it. She sliced onions thin and cooked them in butter until they were soft and brown and sweet. Then she dredged the liver in flour, seasoned it with salt and pepper, and fried it in the same pan. The liver came out tender if she timed it right, tough if she did not. Your father ate it either way, sopping up the onions, with a piece of white bread. You sat across from him, eating a hot dog, because your mother did not make you eat liver. But your father ate it without complaint, the way men ate things back then, because it was food, and food was not supposed to be an event. Liver was cheap, cheaper than steak, cheaper than pork chops, sometimes even cheaper than ground beef. It was organ meat, which meant it was nutritious but not desirable. The butcher sold it by the pound, and your mother bought it when the grocery budget was tight. Liver was iron and protein and vitamins, and your father needed those things because he worked hard and came home tired. So liver showed up on the table once a week, maybe twice if money was especially tight. The smell was the first thing you noticed. Liver smelled metallic and slightly sweet when it was raw. When it hit the hot pan, the smell intensified. It filled the kitchen and drifted into the living room where you were watching television. You knew what was for dinner before anyone told you. And if you were a kid, you groaned, because liver was not something kids ate willingly. Your mother cooked the onions first. She sliced them thin, almost translucent, and cooked them low and slow in butter or margarine until they caramelized. The onions turned golden brown and soft and sweet, and they were the best part of the meal. They soaked up the butter and released their sugars, and by the time they were done, they tasted like candy. The onions were the reason your father could eat the liver. They covered up the strong flavor and added richness. Then she dredged the liver in flour, just a light coating, seasoned with salt and pepper. The flour helped the liver brown and gave it a thin crust. She laid the liver in the same pan where the onions had cooked, and it sizzled immediately. Liver cooked fast, 2 or 3 minutes per side, just long enough to brown the outside and cook the inside to medium. If you cooked it too long, it turned tough and rubbery and bitter. Your mother knew this. She watched the clock. When the liver was done, she plated it with the onions piled on top. Sometimes she made a pan gravy with the drippings, adding a little flour and milk and stirring until it thickened. Sometimes she just served it as is. Your father ate it with mashed potatoes or white bread. He cut the liver in pieces, soaked each piece in onions and gravy, and ate it methodically. He did not talk much while he ate. He just worked his way through the plate. Liver had a texture that was different from other meat. It was softer, almost creamy in the center if it was cooked right. It had a mineral taste, slightly bitter, slightly sweet. It tasted like blood, which makes sense because that is what liver filters. But your father did not care about that. Liver was food. It was protein. It filled him up and cost almost nothing. That was all that mattered. Your mother made liver for your father, not for herself. She usually ate a smaller portion or skipped it altogether and ate the sides instead. And she never made you eat it. She made you a hot dog or a grilled cheese or a bowl of soup, something you would actually eat without complaint. She did not believe in forcing kids to eat things they hated. Liver was your father's meal. You just happened to be at the table while he ate it. By the 1980s, liver started disappearing from family tables. People were eating less organ meat in general. Liver got a reputation for being old-fashioned, Depression-era food. But in the 70s, it was still normal. It was still something men ate because it was cheap and filling, and their fathers had eaten it. Liver was not a treat. It was not even particularly good. But it was dinner. And that was enough. The crock pot arrived in the early 1970s, and it changed the way your mother thought about dinner. You could put a pot roast in before work, set it on low, and come home 8 hours later to a meal that had been cooking itself all day. The house smelled like beef and carrots and onions from the moment you walked in. The meat fell apart with a fork. The potatoes had absorbed all the broth and turned into something soft and rich and faintly sweet. The crock pot was not just convenient. It was a kind of magic. Dinner made itself while you were gone. That was worth something. The crock pot solved a problem that working mothers faced every single day. How to get dinner on the table when you were not home to cook it. Before the crock pot, dinner required presence. You had to be in the kitchen, stirring, checking, adjusting the heat. You had to time everything so it finished right when your family sat down to eat. The crock pot removed all of that. You assembled the ingredients in the morning, turned it on, and walked away. 8 hours later, dinner was ready. The pot roast was the classic crock pot meal. Your mother bought a chuck roast from the butcher, a cheap cut that was tough if you cooked it fast, but tender if you cooked it slow. She placed it in the crock pot with quartered potatoes, chopped carrots, sliced onions, and a packet of onion soup mix. She poured in a cup of beef broth or water. She put the lid on, turned the dial to low, and left for work. That was it. No checking, no stirring. The crock pot did the rest. The slow cooking broke down the tough connective tissue in the meat. By the time you got home, the roast was so tender it fell apart when you touched it with a fork. The vegetables had cooked in the beef juices and absorbed all the flavor. The broth had thickened slightly and turned into a rich, salty gravy. Your mother spooned it over everything, and you ate it with a piece of white bread to soak up the extra liquid. The crock pot was also forgiving. If you forgot to turn it on until 9 in the morning, it was still ready by 5. If dinner ran late and you did not eat until 6:30, the food stayed warm and did not overcook. You could not burn anything in a crock pot. You could not undercook anything either. It just worked every time, with almost no effort. Your mother used the crock pot for more than pot roast. She made chili in it, simmering ground beef, beans, tomatoes, and spices, for 8 hours until everything melded together. She made chicken and dumplings, where the chicken fell off the bone and the dumplings soaked up the broth. She made beef stew, pork chops, and even spaghetti sauce. The crock pot could handle almost anything as long as you gave it enough time. The other benefit was the smell. Coming home to a house that smelled like dinner was already half the battle. It meant someone had thought ahead. It meant the evening was going to be easier. The smell filled the whole house, and by the time you walked in the door, you were already hungry. The anticipation built all day. You knew what was waiting for you, and that was comforting. The crock pot also meant fewer dishes. Everything cooked in one pot. The meat, the vegetables, the gravy. All of it in the same ceramic insert. Your mother served dinner straight from the crock pot, ladling portions onto plates. Then the insert went into the sink to soak, one pot to clean instead of 3 or 4. That mattered when you were tired and still had homework to supervise and laundry to fold. By the mid-70s, almost every family had a crock pot. They were wedding gifts, Christmas gifts, housewarming gifts. They sat on the kitchen counter in harvest gold or avocado green, the colors of the decade. The dial had 2 settings, low and high. Low was for all day. High was for when you forgot, and only had 4 hours. Both worked. The crock pot was not glamorous. It was not the kind of appliance you showed off to guests, but it was reliable. It was practical. And for a working mother trying to get dinner on the table without losing her mind, the crock pot was a lifeline. It meant one less thing to worry about. And in the 1970s, that was everything. The bread in your house was Wonder Bread. White, soft, pre-sliced, and wrapped in a bag covered with colorful balloons. It came in a loaf so light you could squish the whole thing into a ball the size of your fist if you wanted to. It was not artisanal. It was not whole grain. It was not trying to be anything other than what it was, a vehicle for peanut butter, jelly, bologna, or butter. Your mother made sandwiches with it every morning for your lunch. 2 slices folded around whatever filling was in the fridge, wrapped in wax paper and tucked into a brown bag. That was lunch. And the bread stayed soft for days, which was the whole point. Wonder Bread was engineered for consistency. Every slice was exactly the same thickness. Every loaf tasted exactly the same. The texture was pillowy and uniform, with no crust to speak of and no structural integrity. You could press a slice flat with your palm, and it would compress to almost nothing, then spring back when you let go. This was not a flaw. This was the design. Wonder Bread was meant to be soft, easy to chew, and completely inoffensive. Your mother bought it at the grocery store, 2 or 3 loaves at a time. It was cheap. A loaf cost less than 50 cents, and it lasted a week if you were careful. She stored it in the bread box on the counter, and it stayed fresh because it was loaded with preservatives. No mold, no staleness, no hard edges. Wonder Bread could sit on the counter for 5 days and still make a decent sandwich. That kind of reliability mattered when you were feeding a family on a budget. The sandwiches your mother made with Wonder Bread were simple. Peanut butter and jelly was the standard. She spread peanut butter on one slice, jelly on the other, pressed them together, and cut the sandwich in half. Sometimes she cut it diagonally, which made it feel fancier. Sometimes she cut it straight across, which was faster. Either way, the sandwich went into your lunch bag with an apple and a thermos of milk, and that was lunch. Every day. The same sandwich, the same bread, the same routine. Bologna sandwiches were the other option. A slice or 2 of bologna, a smear of mustard, maybe a leaf of iceberg lettuce if your mother was feeling ambitious. The bologna was Oscar Mayer, sliced thin and slightly pink. It tasted like salt and fat and something vaguely meat-flavored. The mustard was French's yellow mustard, tangy and bright. The bread held it all together and added nothing to the flavor, which was the point. Wonder Bread was neutral. It did not compete with the filling. It just carried it. Wonder Bread was also the foundation for other meals. Grilled cheese sandwiches started with 2 slices of Wonder Bread and a slice of American cheese. Your mother buttered the outside of the bread, laid it in a hot skillet, and cooked it until the bread turned golden and the cheese melted. The bread crisped up on the outside, but stayed soft on the inside. You ate it with a bowl of tomato soup, dunking the sandwich until the bread soaked up the soup and turned into something warm and comforting. French toast started with Wonder Bread, too. Your mother dipped slices in a mixture of egg and milk, fried them in butter, and served them with syrup. The bread soaked up the egg without falling apart, which was important. Thicker, crustier bread would have been too much. Wonder Bread was just right. It turned soft and custardy in the center and golden brown on the outside. The bread also worked for toast, though it was not the best option. Toasted Wonder Bread was thin and crispy and a little bit insubstantial. But it held butter and it held jelly, and that was all it needed to do. Your mother made toast in the toaster, 2 slices at a time, and served it with scrambled eggs for breakfast. The toast got cold fast because it was so thin, but you ate it anyway, scraping butter across the surface while it was still warm. Wonder Bread was everywhere in the 1970s. It was in every kitchen, every lunchbox, every school cafeteria. It was the default. The idea of buying artisanal bread from a bakery or baking your own bread at home was not even on the radar for most families. Bread came from the grocery store in a plastic bag, and it was white and soft and pre-sliced. That was bread. By the 1980s, whole wheat bread started showing up more often. People started thinking about fiber and nutrition and whether white bread was actually good for you. But in the 70s, nobody cared. Wonder Bread was convenient, reliable, and cheap. It built strong bodies 12 ways, according to the advertising. And that was good enough. Dinner in the 1970s followed a formula: meat, starch, vegetable. That was it. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, green beans, meatloaf, baked potato, corn, chicken, rice, peas. The plate looked the same every night, just with different proteins rotated in and out. Your mother did not worry about variety or balance, or whether the meal had enough color. She worried about whether there was enough to feed everyone and whether your father would eat it without complaining. The formula worked because it was simple. You knew what to expect, and when you sat down, your plate had everything a meal was supposed to have. The meat was the anchor. Your mother planned dinner around the meat. She decided whether it was going to be beef, pork, or chicken, and everything else fell into place after that. The meat was also the most expensive part of the meal, so she bought whatever was on sale. Pork chops one week, chicken thighs the next, a pot roast if she was feeling ambitious. The meat determined how long dinner took to cook and what time she needed to start. Pork chops were a weeknight staple. Your mother bought them from the butcher, bone-in and thick. She seasoned them with salt and pepper, dredged them in flour, and fried them in a skillet with a little oil. The pork chops cooked fast, 10 minutes total, and came out crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. She served them with applesauce from a jar, the kind that was smooth and sweet and tasted faintly of cinnamon. The applesauce cut through the richness of the pork and added a little sweetness to the plate. Meatloaf was Monday night. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, onion, ketchup, salt, and pepper. Your mother shaped it into a loaf with her hands, placed it in a baking dish, and smeared more ketchup on top. It baked for an hour, and the edges got dark and crispy, while the center stayed soft and dense. Meatloaf was reliable. It tasted the same every time, and there was always enough left over for sandwiches the next day. Chicken was cheaper than beef, but required more work. Your mother bought whole chickens and cut them up herself, or she bought chicken pieces on sale. She baked the chicken in the oven with salt, pepper, and a little paprika for color. The skin crisped up, and the meat stayed juicy if she timed it right. Sometimes she made fried chicken, dredging the pieces in flour and frying them in a skillet full of oil. The fried chicken was hot and greasy and crispy, and you ate it with your hands, tearing the meat off the bone. The starch was always the same: potatoes or rice. Nothing else. Potatoes came mashed, baked, or boiled. Your mother made mashed potatoes by boiling peeled potatoes until they were soft, then mashing them with milk, butter, and salt. The potatoes were smooth and creamy and served in a bowl with a well in the center for gravy. Baked potatoes were even easier. Your mother scrubbed them, poked them with a fork, and put them in the oven for an hour. They came out with crispy skin and fluffy insides, and you split them open and filled them with butter, salt, and sour cream. Rice was the other option. White rice, cooked in a pot with water and a little salt. Your mother brought it to a boil, covered it, and let it simmer for 20 minutes. The rice came out fluffy and bland, which was the point. It soaked up whatever sauce or gravy was on the plate. Rice was cheaper than potatoes and stretched further, so it showed up more often when money was tight. The vegetable was an afterthought. Your mother opened a can of green beans or corn, dumped it into a pot, and heated it on the stove with a little butter and salt. The vegetables were soft, salty, and slightly metallic from the can. They were not the star of the meal. They were just there because a meal was supposed to have a vegetable. You ate them because your mother told you to, not because they tasted good. The plate came together in sections. Meat on one side, starch in the middle, vegetable on the other side. Nothing touched. Your father liked his food separated, and your mother plated it that way out of habit. She served everyone at the stove, carrying the plates to the table, one at a time. Your father got the biggest portion of meat. You got the smallest. Your mother served herself last, and often took less than everyone else. The formula did not change much from night to night. The specific proteins rotated, but the structure stayed the same. Meat, starch, vegetable. That was dinner. Your mother did not experiment. She did not try new cuisines or unusual flavor combinations. She made food that was familiar, predictable, and filling. And that was exactly what your family needed. Dinner was at 6 o'clock every night, unless your father was working late. Your mother timed everything so the meal was ready when he walked in the door. The meat was hot. The potatoes were mashed. The vegetable was warming on the stove. Everyone sat down together. Your father said grace. And then you ate. The same meal, the same formula, night after night. It was reliable. It was comforting. And nobody questioned it. The butter dish on your table did not have butter in it. It had margarine. Your mother bought it in a plastic tub, and it sat on the counter because it spread easier when it was not cold. Margarine was cheaper than butter, and it was supposed to be healthier, which was enough reason to use it. It tasted like nothing mostly, just soft and yellow and kind of oily. But you put it on your toast, your baked potato, your corn on the cob. You did not know the difference because you had never had real butter at home. That was something you got at a restaurant, if you noticed at all. Margarine came into American homes in the 1950s and 60s as a cheaper alternative to butter. By the 1970s, it was everywhere. The advertising sold it as heart-healthy. Butter was animal fat, which meant cholesterol. Margarine was vegetable oil, which meant it was better for you. Or so the commercials said. Your mother believed it. She bought margarine in the big tubs at the grocery store, usually the store brand because it was even cheaper than the name brands. The tub sat on the counter, not in the refrigerator. Margarine stayed soft at room temperature, which was one of its selling points. You could spread it on bread straight from the tub without tearing the bread. Butter, on the other hand, had to be softened or it ripped the bread apart. Margarine was convenient. That mattered when you were making sandwiches for 3 kids every morning before school. Your mother spread margarine on everything. Toast in the morning, baked potatoes at dinner, corn on the cob in the summer. The margarine melted into whatever it touched and added a slick, oily texture, but not much flavor. It was not rich like butter. It did not have that creamy, slightly sweet taste that butter has. Margarine was neutral. It was functional. It did the job without drawing attention to itself. She also used margarine in cooking. When she made scrambled eggs, she melted a spoonful of margarine in the pan first. When she made mashed potatoes, she stirred in a few tablespoons of margarine along with the milk. When she baked, she used margarine instead of butter in the recipe. Most of the time, it worked fine. The cookies came out a little flatter and greasier, but they were still cookies. The cakes were a little denser, but they were still cakes. Margarine was close enough to butter that you could substitute it in most recipes without disaster. The truth is, margarine tasted bad. If you grew up with it, you did not realize it at the time, because you had nothing to compare it to. But margarine had a chemical aftertaste. It was made from vegetable oil that had been hydrogenated, which meant hydrogen was added to solidify the oil. The process created trans fats, which turned out to be worse for your heart than the saturated fat in butter. But nobody knew that in the 1970s. The science was still catching up. Margarine was marketed as the healthy choice, and people believed it. Real butter was expensive. Your mother bought it occasionally, usually for a special meal or for baking something that really needed butter to taste right. But day to day, the butter dish had margarine in it, and because it sat on the counter instead of in the fridge, it picked up smells from the kitchen. If your mother was frying onions, the margarine tasted a little like onions the next morning. If she was cooking bacon, the margarine tasted like bacon. It absorbed everything around it. Kids did not care. You ate margarine on your toast and did not think about it. You melted it on your pancakes and mixed it with the syrup. You stirred it into your oatmeal. It was just part of the meal. But if you went to a diner or a nice restaurant and they brought real butter to the table in little foil packets or a small ceramic dish, you noticed the difference. Real butter tasted richer. It tasted like cream and salt and something faintly sweet. It tasted like what margarine was pretending to be. By the 1980s, the tide started to turn. Studies began showing that trans fats were dangerous. Margarine's reputation as the healthy choice started to crumble. Butter made a comeback. People started realizing that natural fat was better than processed fat, and margarine sales started to decline. But in the 70s, margarine was the standard. It was cheaper, it was convenient, and it was what you had at home. If you ate margarine growing up, you remember the taste. Or more accurately, you remember the lack of taste. You remember the oily texture and the way it melted into everything without adding much flavor. You remember the plastic tub sitting on the counter, the lid never quite sealing right, the margarine always slightly softer than it should have been. Margarine was not good, but it was everywhere, and for most families, that was good enough. Orange juice in the 1970s was not fresh squeezed. It was Tang, a powdered drink mix that came in a jar and turned water into something vaguely orange-flavored when you stirred it in. Astronauts drank it, which made it cool. Your mother made a pitcher every morning, and you drank it with breakfast without thinking twice. It tasted like citric acid and sugar, and it left a film on your teeth. Kool-Aid was the same deal. Powdered, mixed with water and sugar, and poured into a plastic pitcher with a lid that never quite sealed right. These were not treats. These were what you drank. Tang was introduced in 1959, but it did not become popular until NASA used it on space missions in the 1960s. The idea was that astronauts needed vitamin C, and Tang was easier to store and transport than actual orange juice. The marketing capitalized on this. Tang was the drink of the future. It was what astronauts drank in space. Kids wanted it because it was associated with space travel and adventure. Parents bought it because it was cheaper than orange juice and lasted longer in the pantry. Your mother kept a jar of Tang in the cupboard next to the cereal boxes. Every morning she scooped a few tablespoons of the orange powder into a plastic pitcher, added water from the tap, and stirred until the powder dissolved. The mixture turned bright orange, the color of a traffic cone. It did not look like orange juice. It looked like something that had been engineered in a lab, which it had been. Tang tasted sweet and artificial. It had a citric acid bite that was supposed to mimic the tartness of real orange juice, but it did not quite work. It tasted more like orange-flavored candy than fruit. The sweetness lingered in your mouth long after you finished drinking, and if your mother made it too strong, the citric acid burned your throat a little. But you drank it anyway because it was breakfast, and breakfast came with a glass of Tang. Kool-Aid was even more ubiquitous. It came in packets, each one flavored and colored differently: cherry, grape, orange, lemon lime, strawberry. The powder was intensely colored and stained everything it touched. Your mother ripped open a packet, dumped it into a pitcher, added water and sugar, and stirred. The sugar was key. The packet itself did not contain sugar, just flavoring and color. You had to add your own sugar, usually a cup or more depending on how sweet you wanted it. Kool-Aid was what kids drank in the summer. Your mother made a pitcher in the morning and kept it in the refrigerator. You poured yourself a glass whenever you came inside from playing. The Kool-Aid was ice cold and so sweet it made your teeth ache. The flavor did not matter much. Cherry tasted like red. Grape tasted like purple. Orange tasted like orange, but not like actual oranges. Kool-Aid was its own thing, a flavor category that existed only in powder form. The pitcher your mother used for Kool-Aid was plastic, usually white or translucent. The lid had a spout that flipped open, and the handle was molded into the side. The pitcher stained over time. Red Kool-Aid turned the pitcher pink. Grape Kool-Aid turned it purple. No amount of scrubbing would get the stains out. The pitcher became a record of every flavor that had passed through it. Kool-Aid also meant Kool-Aid Man, the mascot who burst through walls in the commercials shouting, "Oh yeah!" Kids loved him. He was a giant sentient pitcher of Kool-Aid with a face, arms, and legs. He brought Kool-Aid to thirsty children in moments of crisis. The commercials were absurd and memorable, and they worked. Kool-Aid became synonymous with childhood in the 1970s. Neither Tang nor Kool-Aid was healthy. They were sugar and artificial flavoring and food coloring. But nobody thought about that. They were drinks. They were cheaper than juice. They lasted forever in the pantry, and kids drank them without complaining, which was more than you could say for milk or water. Real orange juice existed, of course. You could buy it frozen in a can, and your mother would mix it with water in a pitcher. Frozen concentrate was closer to real juice than Tang, but it was more expensive and required freezer space. Tang was easier. Kool-Aid was even easier. So that is what most families drank. By the time you were a teenager, you started to realize that Tang and Kool-Aid were not real drinks. They were substitutes. But by then, you had been drinking them for so long that they tasted like childhood. The artificial sweetness, the bright colors, the plastic pitcher on the kitchen table, all of it was part of what breakfast looked like in the 1970s. And when you moved out and started buying your own groceries, you never bought Tang or Kool-Aid again. But you remembered them. You remembered exactly what they tasted like. Spam sat in the pantry next to the canned soup and the boxes of macaroni. It was not a punchline. It was protein in a can, shelf-stable, cheap, and versatile. Your mother sliced it thick, fried it in a pan until the edges crisped, and served it with eggs for breakfast or alongside fried potatoes for dinner. It tasted salty and dense and faintly metallic, and you either liked it or you learned to tolerate it. Spam came from the war years, when meat was rationed and canned goods were a lifeline. But it stuck around because it worked. You could keep a few cans in the cupboard and know you had something to eat if the grocery budget ran thin. Spam was invented in 1937 by Hormel. But it became a household staple during World War II when fresh meat was scarce. Soldiers ate it overseas. Families ate it at home. By the 1970s, Spam was no longer a necessity born from rationing, but it remained in American pantries because it was cheap and convenient. A can cost less than $1 and contained enough meat to feed a family of 4 if you stretched it with sides. The can itself was distinctive, blue and yellow with the word Spam in bold letters. Your mother opened it with a can opener, working her way around the top edge until the lid came free. Then she turned the can upside down and slid the brick of meat onto a cutting board. The Spam held its shape, a perfect rectangular block with a layer of gelatin on the outside. The gelatin was congealed fat and juices, and your mother scraped it off before slicing the meat. She sliced the Spam into thick slabs, about 1/2 inch each. Then she heated a skillet and laid the slices in the hot pan. The Spam sizzled immediately. It released more fat into the pan as it cooked, and the edges began to crisp and brown. Your mother flipped each slice once, cooking it until both sides were golden and slightly caramelized. The browned edges were the best part. They were salty and crispy and tasted like bacon almost. For breakfast, Spam was served alongside scrambled eggs and toast. The saltiness of the Spam cut through the blandness of the eggs. You ate it with your fork, cutting through the dense meat and soaking up the egg yolk. Sometimes your mother made Spam and eggs together, chopping the Spam into cubes and scrambling it with the eggs in the same pan. The Spam added flavor and texture, turning plain scrambled eggs into something more substantial. For dinner, Spam was fried and served with potatoes. Your mother made fried potatoes in the same pan after the Spam was done, using the rendered fat to cook the potatoes until they were crispy and brown. The potatoes tasted like Spam, which was not a bad thing. They were salty and rich and filling. A plate of fried Spam and fried potatoes was a complete meal. It was cheap, it was hot, and it filled you up. Spam could also be baked. Your mother scored the top of the Spam in a crosshatch pattern, covered it with brown sugar and pineapple slices, and baked it in the oven like a ham. The sugar caramelized on the surface, and the pineapple added sweetness that balanced the saltiness of the meat. Baked Spam was what your mother made when she wanted Spam to feel more like a proper dinner and less like something from a can. Some people made Spam sandwiches. Sliced Spam on white bread with mustard and a slice of cheese. The Spam was cold from the can, sliced thin, and slightly rubbery. The sandwich was salty and dense and filling. It was not good exactly, but it was food. And when you were hungry, that was enough. Spam had a reputation problem even in the 70s. It was working-class food. It was poor people food. It was what you ate when you could not afford real meat. But your mother did not care about that. Spam was in the pantry. It was always there when she needed it, and when she opened a can and fried it up, it became dinner. That was all that mattered. By the 1980s, Spam started disappearing from middle-class tables. People associated it with poverty and deprivation. It became a joke, something people referenced when they wanted to make fun of bad food. But in the 70s, Spam was still normal. It was still something families ate without shame or irony. And if you ate it growing up, you remember exactly what it tasted like. Salty, dense, slightly metallic, and always there when you needed it. Ambrosia salad was real, and people brought it to potlucks on purpose. It was a bowl of canned fruit cocktail, miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream or Cool Whip, depending on who made it. Sometimes there were maraschino cherries. Sometimes there were chopped pecans. It was sweet, cold, creamy, and completely inexplicable to anyone who did not grow up eating it. Your neighbor brought it to the church picnic in a Tupperware bowl, and it sat on the table next to the deviled eggs and the potato salad like it belonged there. Because it did. People ate it. People went back for seconds. Ambrosia salad was not a mistake. It was a choice. The name came from Greek mythology. Ambrosia was the food of the gods, something divine and perfect. Whether the salad lived up to that name is debatable, but the intention was clear. This was supposed to be special. This was supposed to be a treat. Your neighbor took the time to make it, and that meant something. The ingredients were simple and cheap. A can of fruit cocktail, drained. A bag of miniature marshmallows. A bag of sweetened shredded coconut. A container of sour cream or a tub of Cool Whip. Some recipes called for maraschino cherries, the bright red ones from a jar. Some called for chopped pecans or walnuts for texture. Your neighbor mixed everything together in a large bowl, covered it with plastic wrap, and let it sit in the refrigerator overnight. The marshmallows softened as they absorbed moisture from the fruit and the cream. The coconut stayed shredded, but took on the sweetness of everything around it. The next day, your neighbor scooped the ambrosia salad into a serving bowl and brought it to the church basement or the neighborhood potluck. The salad was pale and creamy, studded with bits of fruit and marshmallow. It looked like something a child might have invented, which was part of its charm. There was no sophistication here, no pretension. Just a bowl of sweet, cold, creamy fruit salad that tasted exactly like what it was. People served themselves a spoonful and ate it alongside their fried chicken and their baked beans and their potato salad. The sweetness was jarring next to the savory dishes. But that was how potlucks worked. Everything went on the same plate, and you ate your way through it in whatever order made sense. Some people ate the ambrosia salad first, like a palate cleanser. Some people saved it for last, like dessert. Either way, it got eaten. Kids loved ambrosia salad because it was basically candy disguised as a side dish. The marshmallows were sweet and soft. The fruit was sweet and syrupy. The coconut added texture and more sweetness. Even the sour cream or Cool Whip was sweetened. There was nothing in the bowl that was not sweet. You could eat ambrosia salad with a spoon and pretend it was healthy because it had fruit in it, but everyone knew it was dessert. Adults ate it too, though, which was the strange part. Your neighbor made it. Your aunt made it. Your mother made it occasionally, though not as often as some of the other women in the church group. Ambrosia salad was a staple at potlucks, holiday dinners, and family gatherings. It was expected. If no one brought ambrosia salad, people noticed. The origins of ambrosia salad go back to the late 1800s, when fresh citrus and coconut were exotic and expensive. Making a salad with these ingredients was a way to show off. By the 1970s, the ingredients were cheap and accessible, but the tradition persisted. Ambrosia salad was no longer a luxury. It was just something people made because their mothers had made it and their grandmothers before that. There were variations, of course. Some people used mandarin oranges instead of fruit cocktail. Some people added crushed pineapple. Some people folded in bananas, which turned brown after a few hours and made the whole thing look unappetizing. Some people used whipped cream instead of Cool Whip, which made the salad richer, but also meant it had to be eaten the same day. Every family had their version, and every version was slightly different. Ambrosia salad started to disappear in the 1980s and 90s as food culture shifted. People became more health conscious. The idea of eating a bowl of marshmallows and canned fruit with dinner started to seem strange. But in the 70s, it was perfectly normal. It was comforting. It was familiar. It was what your neighbor brought to the potluck. And you ate it because it was there, and because it tasted like childhood, and because rejecting it would have been rude. If you ate ambrosia salad growing up, you remember the texture, the soft marshmallows, the shredded coconut, the chunks of canned peaches and pears suspended in cream. You remember the sweetness, cloying and intense. And you remember seeing it on the table next to the ham and the green bean casserole, and thinking that this was just how meals worked. Sweet next to savory. Dessert next to dinner. Everything on the same plate. That was the 1970s. Tuna casserole was what your mother made when the grocery money was tight. A can of tuna, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a bag of egg noodles, and a handful of frozen peas. Mix it all together, dump it in a baking dish, and cover the top with crushed potato chips. Bake until the chips turn golden and the edges bubble. That was dinner. It cost almost nothing to make, and it fed the whole family. The tuna was soft and salty. The noodles soaked up the soup. The potato chips added crunch and salt and a little bit of grease. It was not glamorous, but it was warm, and it filled you up. and that was all it needed to do. Tuna casserole belonged to a category of meals that existed because they were cheap and easy. Your mother did not make tuna casserole because anyone asked for it. She made it because it was Tuesday and the paycheck was still 3 days away and she had a can of tuna in the pantry. Tuna was cheap. A can cost maybe 50 cents. Egg noodles were cheap. Cream of mushroom soup was cheap. Frozen peas were cheap. The whole meal cost less than $2 to make and fed a family of 4 with leftovers. Your mother boiled the egg noodles in a pot of salted water until they were soft. While the noodles cooked, she opened the can of tuna and drained the water or oil, depending on which kind she had bought. The tuna came out in chunks, pale and flaky. She opened the can of cream of mushroom soup and dumped it into a bowl. She added the drained tuna, the cooked noodles, and a handful of frozen peas straight from the bag. She stirred everything together until the soup coated the noodles and the tuna was evenly distributed. Then she poured the mixture into a baking dish. A 9 by 13 pan, the same one she used for every casserole. She spread it out evenly, smoothing the top with the back of a spoon. Then came the potato chips. She crushed a handful of chips in her hands, letting the crumbs fall over the top of the casserole. The chips covered the surface in an uneven layer, some pieces larger than others. She did not measure. She just crushed until it looked like enough. The casserole went into the oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The goal was to heat everything through and let the potato chips toast on top. The chips turned golden brown and crispy, and the edges of the casserole started to bubble. The smell filled the kitchen. It smelled like mushroom soup and salt and something faintly fishy from the tuna. It was not an appetizing smell exactly, but it was a dinner smell. It meant food was almost ready. Your mother pulled the casserole out of the oven and set it on the stovetop to cool for a few minutes. Then she scooped portions onto plates with a spatula. The casserole held together well enough to serve, but fell apart when you tried to eat it. The noodles were soft and slippery. The tuna mixed in with everything else, adding little bursts of saltiness. The peas were there for color more than flavor. And the potato chips on top added the only textural contrast in the dish. They were crunchy and salty and a little bit greasy, and they were the best part. Tuna casserole was one of those meals that tasted better than it had any right to. It should not have worked. Canned tuna and canned soup and crushed potato chips should not have added up to something edible. But it did. The soup made everything creamy and cohesive. The tuna added protein. The peas added a little bit of sweetness. And the potato chips made it feel like more than just a pile of sad ingredients scraped together from the back of the pantry. Your father ate tuna casserole without complaining, which was all your mother needed. He did not praise it. He did not ask for seconds. But he ate it, and that was enough. You ate it too, though you picked around the peas and tried to get as many potato chips as possible on your fork with each bite. The chips were the reward. The rest was just the vehicle for getting to the chips. Tuna casserole was also good for leftovers. Your mother covered the baking dish with foil and put it in the refrigerator. The next day she reheated portions in the oven or on the stovetop. The potato chips were no longer crispy, but the casserole itself tasted the same, maybe even better because the flavors had settled overnight. The tuna had absorbed more of the soup. The noodles had softened even further. It was comfort food in the truest sense, not because it tasted amazing, but because it was warm and filling and familiar. By the 1980s, tuna casserole started to feel dated. It became associated with poverty and with an older generation that did not know any better. People started making fun of it, the way they made fun of Spam and Jell-O salad. But in the 70s, tuna casserole was just dinner. It was what your mother made when she needed to stretch the grocery budget and feed everyone without spending more than an hour in the kitchen. And when you sat down to eat it, you did not think about whether it was good or bad. You just ate it, because it was there, and because it was warm, and because that was what dinner looked like on a Tuesday night in 1975. Potatoes appeared at every dinner, mashed, baked, boiled, fried, scalloped, or turned into hash browns for breakfast. The potato was cheap, filling, and dependable. Your mother bought a 10-pound bag at the grocery store and worked her way through it over the course of 2 weeks. She peeled them at the sink with a paring knife, dropping the skins into the trash and the potatoes into a pot of cold water. Mashed potatoes were made with milk, butter, or margarine, and salt. Nothing fancy. No garlic, no cream cheese, no chives. Just potatoes, mashed until smooth, served in a bowl with a well in the center for gravy. The potato was the foundation of American dinner in the 1970s. If your plate did not have a potato on it, something was wrong. The potato was the starch. It was the filler. It was the thing that made the meal feel complete. Your mother planned dinner around the meat, but she never forgot the potato. Steak and baked potato, pork chops and mashed potatoes, chicken and roasted potatoes. The formula never changed. Mashed potatoes were the most common preparation. Your mother bought russet potatoes because they mashed well. She peeled them one at a time, standing at the sink with a paring knife in one hand and a potato in the other. The peels came off in long strips and fell into the trash. The peeled potatoes went into a pot of cold water so they would not turn brown while she finished the rest. Once all the potatoes were peeled, she cut them into chunks and put the pot on the stove. She added enough water to cover the potatoes, salted the water, and brought it to a boil. The potatoes cooked for 20 minutes until they were soft enough to pierce with a fork. Then she drained the potatoes in a colander and put them back in the pot. She added milk, not much, just enough to make them creamy, and a few tablespoons of margarine. Then she mashed. She used a handheld masher, pressing down and twisting until the potatoes broke apart and turned smooth. Some people liked lumpy mashed potatoes. Your mother did not. She mashed until there were no lumps left, until the potatoes were completely smooth and creamy. Then she tasted them and added more salt if they needed it. The mashed potatoes went into a serving bowl and came to the table with a well in the center. The well was for gravy. Your mother made gravy from the drippings in the pan where she had cooked the meat, or she made it from a packet if there were no drippings. The gravy went into the well, and everyone spooned mashed potatoes and gravy onto their plates. The potatoes soaked up the gravy and turned rich and salty. That was the point. Baked potatoes were even easier. Your mother scrubbed the potatoes under running water to get the dirt off. Then she poked each one several times with a fork so they would not explode in the oven. She placed them directly on the oven rack and baked them at 400 degrees for an hour. The skins turned crispy and brown. The insides turned fluffy and soft. When the potatoes were done, she pulled them out and set them on plates. You split the potato open with a knife, and steam poured out. Then you filled the center with butter, salt, and sour cream. The butter melted into the potato. The sour cream added tanginess. The skin was the best part if it was crispy enough. Fried potatoes were for breakfast. Your mother peeled and diced the potatoes, then fried them in a skillet with oil or bacon grease. The potatoes cooked slowly over medium heat, stirring occasionally until they were golden brown and crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. She seasoned them with salt and pepper and served them alongside eggs and toast. Fried potatoes were heavy and filling, and they tasted like comfort and fat and salt. Scalloped potatoes were for special occasions. Your mother sliced the potatoes thin and layered them in a baking dish with butter, flour, milk, and cheese. The potatoes baked in the oven until they were tender and the top was golden and bubbling. Scalloped potatoes were rich and creamy and indulgent. They took more time and more ingredients than regular potatoes, which is why she did not make them often. But when she did, they were worth the effort. Hash browns were another breakfast option. Your mother grated the potatoes on a box grater, squeezed out the excess moisture, and fried them in a skillet until they were crispy and brown. Hash browns were greasy and salty and satisfying, especially when eaten with eggs and bacon. The potato was reliable. It never went bad quickly. It stored well in a cool, dark place. It was cheap enough that your mother could buy a big bag and not worry about the cost. And it filled people up in a way that vegetables did not. The potato was starch and carbohydrates and comfort. It made the meal feel substantial. It made the plate look full. And it soaked up whatever sauce or gravy was on the plate, which meant nothing went to waste. By the end of the decade, potatoes were still a dinner staple, but they were starting to compete with rice and pasta as the go-to starch. Rice was cheaper and easier. Pasta was faster. But the potato held its ground because it was familiar and because it worked. And when your mother put mashed potatoes on the table, you knew exactly what you were getting. Smooth, creamy, salty, warm. The same every time. That was the potato. Dependable, filling, and always there when you needed it. Salisbury steak was not steak. It was ground beef shaped into an oval, cooked in a skillet and covered in brown gravy. Your mother made it because it was cheap and because your father liked gravy. The beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and onion soup mix, then formed into patties and browned on both sides. Then she added beef broth and let it simmer until the gravy thickened. It tasted like salt and beef fat and something vaguely onion-flavored. You ate it with mashed potatoes and green beans, and the gravy covered everything. Salisbury steak was a weeknight meal that pretended to be something nicer than it was, and that was part of the appeal. Salisbury steak was named after Dr. James Salisbury, a physician in the late 1800s who believed that ground beef was the key to good health. His original recipe was much simpler than what your mother made, but the name stuck. By the 1970s, Salisbury steak had evolved into a standard weeknight meal, a way to make ground beef feel more substantial than a plain hamburger patty. Your mother made Salisbury steak when she wanted to serve something that felt like steak but cost like hamburger. Ground beef was cheap. Cheaper than steak, cheaper than pork chops, sometimes even cheaper than chicken. A pound of ground beef cost less than $1, and it could be stretched to feed the whole family. Salisbury steak was one of the ways she stretched it. She started by mixing the ground beef with breadcrumbs and a beaten egg. The breadcrumbs absorbed moisture and helped the patties hold together. The egg acted as a binder. Then she added a packet of onion soup mix, which was a shortcut that added salt, onion flavor, and a little bit of MSG. The soup mix was a miracle ingredient in the 70s. It added flavor to everything without requiring any actual cooking. Your mother mixed everything together with her hands, squishing the meat and breadcrumbs and egg until they were fully combined. Then she shaped the mixture into oval patties. Not round like hamburgers, but oval like steaks. The shape was important. It made the Salisbury steak feel more formal, more like a real cut of meat. She made 4 or 5 patties, depending on how much meat she had and how many people she was feeding. The patties were thick, about ½ an inch, and they held together well because of the breadcrumbs and egg. She heated a skillet and added a little oil. Then she laid the patties in the pan and let them brown on one side. The meat sizzled and released fat into the pan. After a few minutes, she flipped the patties and browned the other side. The goal was not to cook them all the way through at this stage, just to get a crust on the outside. The patties would finish cooking in the gravy. Once the patties were browned, your mother removed them from the pan and set them aside. Then she made the gravy. She left the fat and drippings in the pan and added a little flour, stirring it into the fat until it formed a paste. Then she slowly added beef broth, stirring constantly to prevent lumps. The liquid loosened the browned bits stuck to the bottom of the pan, and the flour thickened the broth into gravy. She seasoned the gravy with salt and pepper, then returned the patties to the pan. She spooned gravy over the top of the patties and let everything simmer for another 10 minutes. The patties finished cooking in the gravy, and the gravy soaked into the meat. By the time your mother brought the skillet to the table, the Salisbury steak was tender and covered in thick brown gravy. She served it with mashed potatoes, spooning extra gravy over the potatoes. The gravy was the whole point. It was salty and rich, and slightly oniony from the soup mix. The meat itself was mild and soft, almost like meatloaf, but without the loaf shape. You cut through the Salisbury steak with a fork, and it fell apart easily. Each bite was half meat, half gravy. Your father loved Salisbury steak because it came with gravy. He loved anything with gravy. Your mother knew this, and she made meals that allowed for gravy whenever possible. Salisbury steak was one of them. The meat was almost secondary. The gravy was the star. Salisbury steak also showed up in TV dinners, which is where a lot of people encountered it for the first time. The Swanson Salisbury steak TV dinner was one of the most popular options in the freezer aisle. It came with a patty of Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, corn, and a little section of gravy. The TV dinner version was not as good as homemade, but it was close enough. And for people who did not have time to cook, the TV dinner was an easy way to get Salisbury steak on the table. By the 1980s, Salisbury steak started to feel old-fashioned. It was associated with TV dinners and cafeteria food and an older generation that did not know any better. But in the 70s, Salisbury steak was just dinner. It was what your mother made when she wanted to serve something that felt substantial without spending a lot of money. And when you ate it, covered in gravy and sitting next to a pile of mashed potatoes, it felt like a real meal. Not fancy, but real. And that was all it needed to be. The salad on your table was iceberg lettuce, cut into wedges or shredded into a bowl. That was it. No arugula, no spinach, no mixed greens. Iceberg was crisp, cold, and almost flavorless, which made it the perfect base for dressing. Your mother served it with Thousand Island or ranch, poured straight from the bottle. Sometimes she added a slice of tomato or a few rings of raw onion. Sometimes she added shredded carrots from a bag. The salad was not the point of the meal. It was something you ate before the real food arrived, or something you put on your plate because your mother told you to. Iceberg lettuce dominated American salad bowls in the 1970s. It was cheap, widely available, and lasted longer than other types of lettuce. A head of iceberg cost maybe 30 cents, and it stayed fresh in the refrigerator for a week. Your mother bought 1 or 2 heads at a time and worked her way through them. Iceberg was the default. If someone said they were making a salad, you knew it would be iceberg lettuce. The preparation was simple. Your mother pulled the outer leaves off the head and threw them away if they were wilted or brown. Then she cut the head in half, and then in half again, creating wedges. Or she shredded it by running a knife through the lettuce until it was in thin strips. Either way, the lettuce went into a bowl or onto plates. There was no washing involved, usually. Your mother assumed the lettuce was clean enough. A quick rinse under cold water if it looked dirty, but nothing more. The wedge salad was a restaurant thing that made its way into homes. 1/4 of a head of iceberg lettuce placed on a plate and topped with dressing. Usually blue cheese dressing or Thousand Island. Sometimes bacon bits. Sometimes chopped tomatoes. The wedge salad was popular because it required almost no work. You did not have to chop or shred the lettuce. You just cut it into quarters and put it on a plate. The person eating it cut through the wedge with a knife and fork, taking bites of crisp lettuce covered in dressing. Shredded iceberg was more common at home. Your mother shredded the lettuce into a bowl and set it on the table with a bottle of dressing. Everyone served themselves, spooning lettuce onto their plates and pouring dressing over it. The dressing options were limited: ranch, Thousand Island, French, Italian. All of them came from bottles: Wishbone, Kraft, Hidden Valley. Your mother did not make dressing from scratch. That was something fancy people did. She bought it at the store and kept it in the refrigerator. Iceberg lettuce had a texture, but not much flavor. It was crisp and watery and cold. The crunch was satisfying, but the lettuce itself tasted like nothing. That was the point. Iceberg was a vehicle for dressing. You ate it for the dressing, not for the lettuce. The lettuce was just there to give the dressing something to cling to. Your mother added toppings sometimes to make the salad more interesting: shredded carrots from a bag, a slice of tomato, pale pink and mealy, because it was January and tomatoes were out of season. A few rings of raw onion, which your father loved and everyone else avoided. Sometimes she added croutons from a box, stale and hard and flavored with fake butter and garlic. The croutons added crunch and a little bit of flavor, but they were mostly just filler. The salad was not optional. Your mother believed that a meal should include vegetables, and salad counted as vegetables. Never mind that iceberg lettuce had almost no nutritional value. It was green, and that was close enough. She put a bowl of salad on the table at dinner, and everyone was expected to take some. You took a small spoonful and drowned it in ranch dressing, which was the only way to make it palatable. Salad also appeared at potlucks and family gatherings, usually in a large bowl with tongs for serving. Someone always brought a salad. It was expected. The salad sat on the table next to the casseroles and the fried chicken, and people took a little bit out of obligation. The salad was there to balance out the heavy, rich food. It was there to make people feel like they were eating something healthy, even though the dressing had more calories than the lettuce. By the 1980s, iceberg lettuce started to lose its dominance. Romaine lettuce became more popular. Mixed greens started showing up in grocery stores. People started thinking about nutrition and realizing that iceberg lettuce was mostly water. But in the 70s, iceberg was the only lettuce that mattered. It was the lettuce your mother bought, the lettuce you ate, and the lettuce that appeared on every dinner table in America. It was crisp, cold, flavorless, and covered in dressing. That was salad, and that was enough. At Thanksgiving or Christmas, your mother put out a relish tray. It was a divided glass dish filled with celery sticks, carrot sticks, black olives, green olives, pickles, and radishes. It sat on the table before dinner, and people picked at it while waiting for the turkey. The celery was stuffed with cream cheese or peanut butter. The olives were from a can and tasted like brine and iron. The pickles were dill, cold, and sour. The relish tray was not exciting, but it was traditional. It meant the meal was special. It meant your mother had gone to the trouble of cutting vegetables and arranging them in a dish, and that was its own kind of care. The relish tray was a holdover from earlier decades, when serving raw vegetables before dinner was considered elegant. By the 1970s, the relish tray was no longer elegant, but it was still expected. Holiday dinners required a relish tray the way they required mashed potatoes and gravy. It was part of the ritual. Your mother brought out the divided glass dish, the same one her mother had used, and filled each section with a different item. The celery came first. Your mother washed the celery stalks and cut them into sticks about 3 inches long. Then she filled the hollow center with cream cheese or peanut butter. Cream cheese was more common, smooth and tangy and cool against the crisp celery. Peanut butter was for kids, who liked the combination of crunchy and creamy and salty. The stuffed celery went into one section of the relish tray, standing upright so everyone could see the filling. The carrots were next. Your mother peeled them and cut them into sticks, roughly the same size as the celery. The carrots were sweet and crunchy and tasted like earth. They went into another section of the tray, often next to the celery. The carrots and celery were the only fresh vegetables on the tray. Everything else came from jars or cans. The olives were a requirement. Black olives and green olives, both from cans. Your mother drained the liquid and dumped the olives into their sections of the tray. The black olives were soft and mild, with a faintly metallic taste from the can. Kids loved black olives because you could stick them on your fingers and pretend they were fingernails. The green olives were firmer and saltier, often stuffed with pimentos. Your father ate the green olives by the handful. You avoided them because they tasted like brine and made your mouth pucker. The pickles were dill pickles, sliced into spears or served whole if they were small enough. The pickles came from a jar, cold and sour and crunchy. They tasted sharp and vinegary, and they cut through the richness of the other foods on the table. The pickles went into their own section, swimming in a little bit of the brine from the jar to keep them moist. Radishes were the last item, and they were optional. Your mother sliced them thin, so the red skin and white flesh made little circles. Radishes were peppery and bitter, and most people skipped them. But they added color to the tray, and that mattered. The relish tray was supposed to look abundant and colorful, even if half the items went uneaten. The relish tray sat on the table while people gathered in the living room or the kitchen, waiting for the turkey to finish roasting. Everyone walked past the tray and picked at it. Your uncle grabbed a handful of olives. Your aunt took a celery stick. Your father ate the pickles and the green olives and ignored everything else. You took a piece of celery stuffed with peanut butter and left the radishes alone. By the time dinner was served, the relish tray was half empty. The celery and carrots were gone. The olives were mostly gone. The pickles were gone. The radishes were still there, untouched, sitting in their section of the tray, like a reminder that not everything needs to be eaten to serve its purpose. The relish tray had done its job. It had kept people occupied while they waited. It had made the meal feel special. The relish tray was not just about the food. It was about presentation. It was about taking the time to arrange vegetables in a dish and put it on the table before the meal. It was about tradition. Your mother's mother had served a relish tray, and now your mother served one too. It was what you did at holiday dinners. It was part of the ritual, like saying grace or setting the table with the good dishes. After dinner, the relish tray went back to the kitchen. Your mother covered it with plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. The leftover celery and carrots got eaten as snacks over the next few days. The radishes usually got thrown away. The glass dish got washed and put back in the cupboard, where it would sit until the next holiday. The relish tray was not exciting. It was not innovative or surprising. But it was there, year after year, sitting on the table before dinner. And when you saw it, you knew the meal was going to be special. You knew your mother had put in effort. You knew this was not just another Tuesday night. This was Thanksgiving. This was Christmas. This was a meal that mattered, and the relish tray was part of what made it matter. Pigs in a blanket were what your mother made when she did not feel like cooking. Crescent roll dough from a can, unrolled and cut into triangles. A hot dog or a cocktail weenie placed on each triangle. Roll it up, bake it, and serve. That was dinner, or at least part of it. The dough puffed up around the hot dog and turned golden brown. The hot dogs stayed soft and salty inside. You ate them with ketchup or mustard, and your mother served them with a bag of frozen French fries. She dumped onto a baking sheet and put in the oven alongside the pigs. It was not a complete meal, but it was fast, and it was hot, and nobody complained. Pigs in a blanket were easy. That was the whole point. Your mother could make them in 15 minutes from start to finish. not counting baking time. She opened the can of crescent roll dough, and it made that distinctive pop when the pressure released. The dough came out in a long sheet, perforated into triangles. She separated the triangles and laid them on the counter. Then she opened the package of hot dogs. Ballpark or Oscar Mayer, whichever was on sale. She cut each hot dog in half if they were regular size, or left them whole if they were cocktail weenies. She placed a hot dog on the wide end of each triangle and rolled the dough around it, tucking the ends under so the hot dog was mostly covered. Some of the hot dog poked out on either end, which was fine. That was part of the look. She arranged the pigs in a blanket on a baking sheet, leaving a little space between each one so they could expand. Then she put them in the oven at 375 degrees for 12 minutes. The dough puffed up and turned golden brown. The hot dogs got hot and slightly crispy on the ends, where they were exposed. When the timer went off, your mother pulled them out and let them cool for a minute before serving. Pigs in a blanket were finger food. You picked them up with your hands and ate them in 2 or 3 bites. The dough was soft and buttery. The hot dog was salty and meaty and slightly smoky. Together, they tasted like a simplified version of a corn dog, but without the cornmeal batter. You dipped them in ketchup or mustard, depending on your preference. The ketchup added sweetness. The mustard added tang. Either way, the pigs in a blanket were gone within minutes. Your mother served them with frozen French fries because pigs in a blanket alone did not feel like enough. The fries came from a bag in the freezer, crinkle cutter straight, and she dumped them onto a baking sheet and baked them alongside the pigs. The fries came out hot and crispy and salty, and you ate them with more ketchup. Between the pigs in a blanket and the fries, it felt like a meal. Not a great meal, but a meal. Pigs in a blanket also showed up at parties. Birthday parties, game day gatherings, holiday parties. Your mother made a tray of them and brought them to the table with a bowl of mustard for dipping. People ate them while standing around talking. Kids loved them because they were small and easy to eat and tasted like hot dogs. Adults ate them because they were there and because they were good enough to keep eating. The crescent roll dough was key. It came in a refrigerated can, and it was one of the convenience foods that defined 70s cooking. The dough was pre-made, pre-portioned, and ready to use. All you had to do was unroll it and bake it. Your mother used crescent roll dough for more than just pigs in a blanket. She used it to make quick desserts, wrapping it around apple slices and sprinkling cinnamon sugar on top. She used it to make turnovers, filling the triangles with cheese or ham. The dough was versatile and foolproof, which made it a staple in the refrigerator. Pigs in a blanket were not fancy. They were not impressive. They were not the kind of thing you served to company unless the company was your neighbor's or your sister's family. But they were easy, and they were fast, and they were reliable. Your mother knew that if she made pigs in a blanket, you would eat them. Your father would eat them. Your siblings would eat them. Nobody would complain. Nobody would ask what was for dinner and then groan when she told them. Pigs in a blanket were safe. By the 1980s, pigs in a blanket started to feel like kid food. They became associated with birthday parties and children's menus. Adults stopped eating them, or at least stopped admitting they ate them. But in the 70s, pigs in a blanket were just dinner. They were what your mother made when she was tired or busy, or did not feel like standing over the stove. And when you sat down to eat them, you did not think about whether they were fancy or impressive. You just ate them. Because they were hot, and they were salty, and they were there. The vegetables on your plate came from a can. Green beans, corn, peas, carrots, all of them were canned, drained, and heated in a pot with a little butter and salt. Fresh vegetables were for summer, when your neighbor's garden was producing more than they could eat, and they left bags of tomatoes and zucchini on your porch. The rest of the year, vegetables came from the pantry. They were soft, salty, and a little metallic. but they were vegetables, and that counted. Your mother opened the can with a manual can opener, dumped the contents into a pot, and stirred them over medium heat until they were warm enough to serve. Canned vegetables were a staple in every American kitchen in the 1970s. They were cheap, convenient, and shelf-stable. A can of green beans cost maybe 25 cents. A can of corn cost about the same. Your mother bought them by the dozen and stacked them in the pantry. When it was time to make dinner, she pulled a can off the shelf and opened it. No washing, no chopping, no prep work. Just open, heat, and serve. Green beans were the most common canned vegetable. Your mother bought Del Monte or Green Giant, whichever was on sale. The beans came in a can with liquid, which was mostly water and salt. She opened the can and drained the liquid in the sink. Then she dumped the beans into a pot and added a pat of margarine and a pinch of salt. She heated the beans over medium heat, stirring occasionally until they were warm. The beans were soft and limp and tasted like salt and metal. They did not taste like fresh green beans, but they were close enough. Corn was the other staple. Canned corn came in two varieties, whole kernel and cream style. Whole kernel corn was what your mother served most often. The corn was yellow and sweet and a little bit mushy. She drained the liquid and heated the corn the same way she heated the green beans. A little margarine, a little salt. The corn tasted sweet and starchy and faintly metallic from the can. Cream-style corn was thicker, almost like a sauce. The corn was mixed with a creamy liquid that turned the whole thing into something between a vegetable and a side dish. Your father liked cream-style corn. You did not. Peas were another option. Canned peas were small and soft and tasted like nothing. They were the same color as green beans, but rounder and mushier. Your mother heated them the same way as the other canned vegetables, and they showed up on your plate next to the meat and the potatoes. You pushed them around with your fork and ate them one at a time, trying to get through them as quickly as possible so you could move on to the rest of the meal. Canned carrots were less common, but still made an appearance. Sliced carrots, soft and sweet, and slightly slimy from the can. Your mother drained them and heated them with margarine and a little sugar, which made them even sweeter. Canned carrots tasted like baby food, but your father ate them without complaint. The canned vegetables were always soft. Overcooked, really, because they were cooked once when they were canned and then heated again before serving. There was no crunch, no texture. Just soft, salty vegetables that fell apart when you touched them with a fork. But that was normal. That was what vegetables were supposed to be like. The idea of vegetables with texture, of vegetables that were still slightly crisp, was foreign. Vegetables were supposed to be soft. Your mother believed that a meal needed a vegetable. It did not matter if the vegetable tasted good or if anyone actually wanted to eat it. A meal was meat, starch, and vegetable. That was the formula. So she opened a can and heated the vegetables and put them on the table. And everyone took a spoonful and ate them because that was what you did. Fresh vegetables were a luxury. They were more expensive, and they required more work. You had to wash them, peel them, chop them, and cook them. Canned vegetables required none of that. And in the winter, fresh vegetables were not even available. Tomatoes in January were pale and flavorless. Corn on the cob was out of season. Lettuce was iceberg, which barely counted as a vegetable. So your mother relied on canned vegetables to fill the vegetable slot on the plate. In the summer, things were different. Your neighbor grew tomatoes in their backyard, and they always had more than they could use. They left a bag on your porch, and your mother served sliced tomatoes with dinner. Fresh tomatoes were red and juicy and tasted like summer. She also got zucchini from the neighbor, and she sliced it and fried it in a pan with a little oil. Fresh zucchini was soft and mild and tasted like nothing, but it was fresh, and that made it special. But summer was short, and the rest of the year was canned vegetables, green beans, corn, peas, carrots, heated in a pot with margarine and salt, served on the side, eaten without enthusiasm. That was vegetables in the 1970s. Not fresh, not exciting, not particularly good. But they were there, and they counted, and that was enough. Deviled eggs appeared at every potluck, every picnic, every family gathering. Your aunt made them the night before and brought them in a special carrier designed to keep the eggs from sliding around. She boiled a dozen eggs, peeled them, sliced them in half, and scooped out the yolks. Then she mashed the yolks with mayonnaise, mustard, salt, and a little vinegar, spooned the mixture back into the egg whites, and sprinkled paprika on top. They were cold, creamy, tangy, and gone within 20 minutes of being set on the table. Deviled eggs were not optional. They were required. If you showed up to a potluck without deviled eggs, someone would notice. Deviled eggs were simple to make, but required patience. Your aunt started by boiling the eggs. She placed a dozen eggs in a pot, covered them with cold water, and brought the water to a boil. Once the water boiled, she turned off the heat and let the eggs sit in the hot water for 12 minutes. This method cooked the eggs perfectly every time. The yolks came out firm, but not chalky. The whites were tender, but not rubbery. After 12 minutes, she drained the hot water and ran cold water over the eggs to cool them down. Then she peeled them. Peeling eggs was tedious. The shells stuck to the whites, and she had to work carefully to avoid tearing the eggs. She peeled all 12 eggs and rinsed them under cold water to remove any bits of shell. Then she sliced each egg in half lengthwise and carefully scooped out the yolks. The yolks went into a bowl. The whites went onto a plate, arranged in neat rows. She mashed the yolks with a fork until they were crumbly. Then she added mayonnaise, a spoonful at a time, until the mixture was creamy and smooth. She added a teaspoon of yellow mustard for tang and color. She added a splash of vinegar for acidity. She added salt and pepper to taste. Then she stirred everything together until the filling was smooth and fluffy. The next step was filling the egg whites. Your aunt used a spoon to scoop the yolk mixture back into the hollow centers of the egg whites. Some people used a piping bag to make the filling look fancy, but your aunt did not bother. She just spooned the filling in and smoothed it over with the back of the spoon. Each egg white got a generous mound of filling, enough that it looked abundant, but not so much that it fell over. The final touch was paprika. Your aunt sprinkled paprika over the top of each deviled egg, giving them a dusting of red. The paprika did not add much flavor, but it made the eggs look finished. It added color. It made the deviled eggs look like deviled eggs. She arranged the eggs on a plate and covered them with plastic wrap. Then she put them in the refrigerator overnight. Deviled eggs were always better the next day, after the flavors had time to meld together. The vinegar and mustard softened. The mayonnaise soaked into the yolks. The eggs became more cohesive, more creamy, more flavorful. The next day, your aunt carried the plate to the church basement, or the family reunion, or the neighborhood potluck. She set the deviled eggs on the table next to the other appetizers, and people immediately started picking them up. Deviled eggs were always one of the first dishes to disappear. They were small, they were portable, and they were delicious. You could eat 1 and 2 bites, standing up, with a paper napkin in your hand. The eggs were cold and creamy. The filling was tangy and slightly sweet from the mayonnaise. The whites were tender and mild. The paprika added a tiny bit of smokiness, though most people did not notice. The deviled eggs were rich, but not heavy. They were satisfying, but not filling. You could eat 3 or 4 of them and still have room for the main meal. Deviled eggs were also democratic. Everyone liked them. Kids liked them. Adults liked them. Old people liked them. They were mild enough that nobody found them offensive, but flavorful enough that they were worth eating. They were also inexpensive to make. A dozen eggs cost less than $1. Mayonnaise and mustard were pantry staples. Making deviled eggs was a way to contribute to a potluck without spending much money or much time. By the end of the gathering, the plate was empty. Maybe 1 or 2 eggs remained, pushed to the edge of the plate where someone had overlooked them. Your aunt covered the plate with plastic wrap and took it home. She washed the plate and put it away. And she knew she would make deviled eggs again the next time someone had a gathering. Because deviled eggs were expected. They were tradition. They were what you brought when you wanted to contribute something simple and reliable. Deviled eggs have never really gone out of style. They still show up at potlucks and picnics and holiday dinners. But in the 1970s, they were everywhere. They were at every gathering, on every buffet table, in every refrigerator the night before a party. They were part of the fabric of social eating. And when you saw a plate of deviled eggs, you knew you were at the right place. You knew someone had taken the time to boil and peel and fill a dozen eggs. And you knew they would be gone before the main course arrived. Meatloaf was what your mother made at the start of the week. Ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, onion, ketchup, salt, and pepper. Mix it all together with your hands, shape it into a loaf, and bake it in a pan, with more ketchup smeared on top. The edges got dark and crispy. The center stayed soft and dense. Your mother sliced it thick and served it with mashed potatoes and canned green beans. Meatloaf was reliable. It tasted the same every time. And there was always enough left over for sandwiches the next day, which your mother made with white bread and more ketchup. Meatloaf was a Monday night tradition because it was easy and because it stretched. 1.5 pounds of ground beef could feed the whole family with leftovers if you added enough breadcrumbs and egg. Your mother bought the ground beef on sale, usually the fattiest option, because it was the cheapest. The fat rendered out during baking and collected in the bottom of the pan, which your mother poured off before serving. What was left was a loaf of meat that held together when you sliced it and tasted like beef and ketchup and onion. Your mother made meatloaf the same way every time. She dumped the ground beef into a large bowl and added breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs absorbed moisture and helped the meatloaf hold its shape. She cracked an egg into the bowl and added it to the mixture. The egg acted as a binder, holding everything together so the meatloaf did not fall apart when you sliced it. Then she added chopped onion, either fresh or from a jar of dried minced onion, salt and pepper, and ketchup. Always ketchup. The ketchup added sweetness and tang and color. It turned the meat mixture slightly pink and made everything stick together. She mixed it all with her hands. This was not a job for a spoon or a spatula. You had to get your hands in there and squish everything together until the beef and breadcrumbs and egg and onion were fully combined. Your mother mixed until the mixture was uniform. Then she shaped it into a loaf. She placed the loaf in a baking dish or a loaf pan, depending on what she had clean. Then she smeared more ketchup on top, covering the entire surface with a thick layer. The ketchup would caramelize in the oven and form a glaze. The meatloaf baked at 350 degrees for an hour. The house filled with the smell of beef and onion and ketchup. The edges of the loaf got dark and slightly crispy. The ketchup on top turned glossy and thick. When the meatloaf was done, your mother pulled it out of the oven and let it rest for 10 minutes before slicing. The resting time let the juices redistribute so the loaf did not fall apart when she cut into it. She sliced the meatloaf thick, about 1 inch per slice. The slices held together well, with a dark brown crust on the outside and a soft, dense interior. The meatloaf was savory and slightly sweet from the ketchup. It was salty and rich from the beef. It was filling and satisfying in a way that only ground beef could be. Your mother served it with mashed potatoes and poured the pan drippings over the potatoes like gravy. The drippings were salty and fatty and tasted like concentrated beef and ketchup. Your father ate 2 slices. You ate 1. Your mother ate a smaller slice and gave the rest to your father. There was always at least a third of the meatloaf left over, which your mother covered with foil and put in the refrigerator. The next day, she sliced the leftover meatloaf thin and made sandwiches. Meatloaf sandwiches were better than fresh meatloaf. The meat had firmed up overnight and sliced cleanly. She spread ketchup or mustard on white bread, added 2 slices of cold meatloaf, and wrapped the sandwich in wax paper. That was lunch. Cold meatloaf on white bread, eaten at your desk at school or at work. Meatloaf was also something your mother could make ahead. She could mix it in the morning, shape it, and leave it in the refrigerator until it was time to bake it. Or she could make 2 loaves at once and freeze one for later. Meatloaf froze well. She wrapped it tightly in foil and put it in the freezer. And a month later, she could pull it out, thaw it, and bake it. The convenience mattered when she was busy or tired or did not feel like thinking about what to make for dinner. Meatloaf was also cheap. Ground beef was the cheapest meat you could buy. Breadcrumbs were nearly free if you saved old bread and dried it out. An egg cost pennies. Onion and ketchup were pantry staples. The whole meatloaf cost maybe $2 to make, and it fed the family twice. Once for dinner, once for sandwiches. That kind of economy mattered when you were raising kids on a single income. By the 1980s, meatloaf started to feel old-fashioned. It became associated with an older generation that did not know how to cook anything else. But in the 70s, meatloaf was just dinner. It was what your mother made on Monday nights, because it was easy and cheap and reliable. And when you sat down to eat it, with mashed potatoes on the side and ketchup on top, it tasted like home. Not because it was fancy or impressive, but because it was there, every Monday, the same as last week, the same as next week. That was meatloaf, reliable, filling, and always there when you needed it. Your mother did not bake cakes from scratch. She used a box mix, Duncan Hines or Betty Crocker, pulled from the pantry and mixed with eggs, oil, and water. The batter went into a greased pan and baked for 30 minutes. Then she let it cool, spread frosting from a can on top, and called it done. The cake was sweet, soft, and a little bit chemical tasting, but it was cake. And when she brought it to the table with candles stuck in the top, it was a birthday. Store-bought cake mix was not cheating, it was practical. And it tasted exactly the way a cake was supposed to taste. Cake mix arrived in American kitchens in the 1950s, but by the 70s it had completely replaced scratch baking for most families. The boxes lined the shelves at the grocery store. Yellow cake, chocolate cake, white cake, devil's food, marble. Your mother bought whichever flavor was on sale or whichever flavor you requested for your birthday. A box of cake mix cost less than $1. A can of frosting cost about the same. For $2, you could make a birthday cake that fed 8 people. The instructions were simple and printed on the back of the box. Your mother read them every time, even though she had made the same cake 100 times before. The recipe never changed. 1 box of mix, 3 eggs, half a cup of oil, and 1 cup of water. She cracked the eggs into a bowl, added the oil and water, then dumped in the cake mix. She stirred it with a wooden spoon until the batter was smooth, and there were no lumps. The batter was thick and sweet-smelling, and if you asked nicely, she let you lick the spoon. She greased a 9 by 13 pan with margarine or shortening, rubbing it into every corner so the cake would not stick. Then she poured the batter into the pan, tipping it to spread the batter evenly. The pan went into the oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The kitchen filled with the smell of cake. Sweet and vanilla and slightly artificial, but unmistakably cake. You could smell it from the living room, and you knew something good was happening. When the timer went off, your mother pulled the cake out and tested it with a toothpick. If the toothpick came out clean, the cake was done. If it came out with batter on it, the cake went back in for a few more minutes. Once the cake was done, she set it on the counter to cool. The cake had to cool completely before she frosted it, or the frosting would melt and slide off. So she left it on the counter for an hour, sometimes longer, while the house filled with the smell of warm cake and everyone waited. The frosting came from a can. Chocolate frosting was the most popular, thick and sweet and dark brown. Your mother opened the can and stirred the frosting with a knife to loosen it. Then she scooped it onto the cooled cake and spread it across the surface. The frosting was dense and sticky, and it took effort to spread it evenly. She worked the knife back and forth, smoothing the frosting into a thick layer that covered the entire cake. The frosting did not look professional, but it looked like a birthday cake. And that was all it needed to be. If it was a birthday, your mother stuck candles in the frosting. The number of candles matched your age, or at least it was supposed to. Sometimes she ran out of candles and used whatever was in the drawer. The candles were thin and colorful, with little plastic holders at the bottom so they stood upright in the frosting. She lit the candles with a match, carried the cake to the table, and everyone sang. The cake glowed with candlelight, and you closed your eyes and made a wish, and blew out the candles in one breath. Then your mother cut the cake. She sliced it into squares and served it on paper plates. The cake was soft and moist and sweet. The frosting was even sweeter, thick and sugary and slightly grainy. Together, they tasted like every birthday cake you had ever eaten. Not because the flavor was unique or special, but because it was consistent. Every cake from a box tasted the same. That was the point. You knew what you were getting. Cake mix was foolproof. It was impossible to mess up. As long as you followed the instructions and did not overbake it, the cake came out fine. Your mother did not have to worry about whether she had creamed the butter and sugar correctly, or whether the baking powder was still good. The mix had everything pre-measured and balanced. All she had to do was add eggs, oil, and water. That reliability mattered when you were baking a cake for your child's birthday and did not have time to start over if something went wrong. Scratch baking was for people with time and patience, people who enjoyed baking and wanted to show off. Your mother was not one of those people. She baked because it was your birthday and you deserved a cake. The box mix let her do that without stress or effort. And when she brought the cake to the table, covered in frosting and glowing with candles, nobody cared that it came from a box. It was cake. It was your birthday. And that was all that mattered. Fried bologna was a legitimate meal. Your mother pulled a few slices from the package, tossed them in a hot skillet, and let them curl and brown around the edges. Then she put them on white bread with mustard and called it lunch. The bologna crisped up where it touched the pan and stayed soft in the center. It tasted like salt and smoke and something faintly sweet. You ate it with potato chips from a bag, and the whole meal cost maybe 50 cents. Fried bologna was not fancy, but it was fast, and it was filling, and that was all it needed to be. Bologna was cheap, cheaper than ham, cheaper than roast beef, sometimes even cheaper than hot dogs. A pound of bologna cost less than $1, and it lasted a week in the refrigerator. Your mother bought Oscar Mayer, or the store brand, sliced thin and stacked in a plastic package. The bologna was pink and smooth and perfectly round. It was processed meat, which meant it was uniform and reliable. Every slice looked the same. Every slice tasted the same. Fried bologna was better than cold bologna. Cold bologna was fine on a sandwich, but it was slippery and bland. Frying it changed everything. Your mother heated a skillet over medium-high heat and laid the bologna slices in the pan. The bologna sizzled immediately. As it cooked, it curled up around the edges, forming a little bowl shape. The center stayed flat and soft. The edges got crispy and brown and slightly charred. Your mother flipped the bologna once, cooking it on both sides until it was browned and crispy. The smell of frying bologna filled the kitchen. It smelled like breakfast meat, like bacon or sausage, but sweeter and saltier. The smell was not subtle. It drifted through the house and announced what was for lunch. You knew fried bologna was coming before your mother called you to the table. She pulled the bologna out of the skillet and laid it on white bread. 2 slices of Wonder Bread, soft and pillowy. She spread yellow mustard on one slice, the kind that came in a squeeze bottle and was bright and tangy. Then she stacked the bologna on top. 2 or 3 slices, depending on how hungry you were. The bologna was hot and greasy, and the grease soaked into the bread. She put the other slice of bread on top and pressed down gently, squishing the sandwich together. Then she cut it in half diagonally or straight across and put it on a plate. The fried bologna sandwich was simple. Bread, meat, mustard. Nothing else. No lettuce, no tomato, no cheese. Just bologna and mustard on white bread. The bologna was salty and smoky. The mustard was tangy and sharp. The bread was soft and soaked up the grease from the bologna. You ate the sandwich with your hands, and the grease got on your fingers. You wiped your hands on a napkin and ate potato chips on the side, salty and crunchy and greasy in their own right. Fried bologna sandwiches were what your mother made when she did not have time to cook a real lunch. When you came home from school hungry and needed something fast. When it was Saturday and everyone was home and nobody wanted to wait for a full meal. Fried bologna took 5 minutes from start to finish. It required no planning, no prep work, no complicated ingredients. Just bologna, bread, and mustard. And a hot skillet. Your mother also made fried bologna for breakfast sometimes. She fried the bologna and served it alongside scrambled eggs and toast. The bologna stood in for bacon or sausage. It was cheaper and just as filling. The saltiness of the bologna balanced the blandness of the eggs. You ate them together, cutting through the bologna and soaking up the egg yolk with your toast. Fried bologna was working-class food. It was poor people food. It was what you ate when you could not afford ham or roast beef or real deli meat. But your mother did not care about that. Bologna was in the refrigerator. It was cheap and easy, and your kids would eat it without complaining. That was all she needed. Some people cut a slit in the center of the bologna before frying it, so it would not curl up as much. Your mother did not bother. She let it curl. The curled edges were the best part. They were crispy and dark and tasted like concentrated bologna. You ate those edges first, then worked your way to the softer center. By the 1980s, bologna started to disappear from middle-class tables. It became associated with poverty and with an era that did not know any better. People started buying turkey and ham and roast beef instead. Bologna became something you fed to kids, not something adults admitted to eating. But in the 70s, fried bologna was just lunch. It was fast, it was cheap, it was hot, and it filled you up. And when your mother put a fried bologna sandwich in front of you, you ate it. Because it tasted good. Because it was there. And because that was what lunch looked like on a Tuesday afternoon in 1976. It is 1978 now. Your mother is at the stove, stirring something in a pot. The kitchen smells like dinner. The table is set. Your father will be home in 20 minutes, and when he walks through the door, the food will be ready. Hot, simple, and exactly what it needs to be. This is how it worked. This is what dinner looked like. Not because anyone planned it this way or because it was the best option, but because it was what people had. And what they had was enough. The food was not fancy. It was not innovative. It was not trying to be anything other than what it was. Casseroles and canned vegetables and meatloaf and Jell-O salad, Spam and Tang and margarine and Wonder Bread. It was cheap, practical, and predictable. And that predictability was its own kind of comfort. You knew what was coming. You knew what it would taste like. And when you sat down to eat it, you knew you were home. The 1970s are gone now. The food has changed. The grocery stores look different. The meals are different. But the memory stays. The taste of your mother's meatloaf. The smell of a casserole baking in the oven. The sound of a can opener working its way around the top of a can of green beans. The feeling of sitting at the table with your family, eating the same meal you had eaten 100 times before. Those memories do not fade. They stay with you. They hold you. They remind you of a time when dinner happened every night at 6 o'clock, and someone was always there to make sure it happened. If you lived through it, you know. You remember the food exactly as it was. Not better than it was, not worse. Just exactly. The casserole that stretched a pound of ground beef across 6 servings, the Jell-O salad that sat on the table next to the pot roast, the TV dinner in the aluminum tray, the fried bologna sandwich on white bread. You remember it because it was there. Every day, every week, every year. It was the backdrop to your childhood. It was what you ate while life happened around you. And if you did not live through it, now you know. Now you know what your parents ate, what your grandparents ate, what dinner looked like in the 1970s beyond the fast food and the drive-thrus and the TV commercials. It looked like this: simple, cheap, practical, and warm. It looked like someone standing at the stove, making sure everyone got fed. It looked like a table set with mismatched plates and a casserole dish in the center. It looked like family. The food of the 1970s was not perfect, but it was real. It was there, and it was enough. That's what matters. Not whether it was good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, impressive or embarrassing. What matters is that it existed. What matters is that someone made it. What matters is that you remember it. If this brought back memories, leave a comment and tell me what your family ate. What was on the table on a Tuesday night in 1975? What did your mother make when the grocery budget was tight? What did dinner smell like when you walked in the door after school? I want to hear your stories. I want to know what you remember. And if you enjoyed this, hit that like button. Subscribe if you have not already. We have more stories coming, more memories, more moments from a time that feels both distant and close. Check us out on Spotify if you want to listen while you are doing other things. The link is in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering with me. The kitchen is quiet now. Dinner is over. The dishes are washed. The table is cleared. But the memory stays. And that is worth something. That is worth everything. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.